For those of you joining us online, my name is Harold Trinkunas. I'm the Deputy Director at the Center for International Security and Cooperation at Stanford University. Very pleased to welcome you this week to our research seminar. Today, my colleague and friend, Dr. Herb Lin, will be giving a talk on AI and the U.S. nuclear enterprise, a subject matter of his recent research. I'm going to just provide a very brief introduction of Herb since we all have his bio from when you signed up. But he's a senior research scholar here at CSAC and the Hank J. Holland Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. He has a long career in science, technology, and science and emerging technology, originally starting out working on nuclear security issues, later on cyber issues, more recently on AI, and then full circle back to nuclear. So looking forward to hearing what he has to talk about. He received his PhD in physics from MIT. We will, Dr. Lin will talk for about 35 minutes, then we'll go to a moderated Q&A. Just a reminder for the Q&A, one finger to get on the queue to ask a question, two fingers to jump in at the matter immediately at hand if you have a follow-up point. And if you're online, please use the Q&A function in Zoom to enter your question into the queue. All right, without much further ado, over to you, Herb.
Thanks so much. Really glad to be here. Microphone is working. The slides here, I've been told, are pretty dense. I don't intend to repeat everything on the slides. Slides will be available. You can contact me or Eliana for copies of the slides later. So my job here is to talk a little bit about AI and the U.S. nuclear enterprise. And I want to start out by the first known example of nuclear command and control. This is the order to bomb Japan in July of 1945. But just imagine that you were using Microsoft Word to write this up, to type this up in 1945, right? And we've all made the typo here, TEH, right? And what does autocorrect do for you? It just changes it to the, right? It automatically changes it. And that fact is important because that's AI. AI is responsible for, it is in some sense the technology that underlies, autocorrect and spell checks and autocomplete and so on. All functions that you know about from Word. Okay. There's lots of talk about AI and the launch decision. Lots of debate. What I want to have is what I'd like to propose here is a structured way of having a reasoned conversation about AI and nuclear enterprise, which means you need to have a definition for AI and the nuclear enterprise, right? The thorny issues are concealed in the definitions. We can talk about autocomplete as one part of AI. We can also talk about giving ChatGPT the launch codes to send out EAMs as another part of AI in the nuclear enterprise. Okay. Now, I hope you will agree that that the idea of giving ChatGPT the launch code is a ridiculous idea. Okay. Nobody is advocating that. So that's a caricature of the debate. Okay. No one is advocating that. On the other hand, I hope that nobody will object to autocorrect in Word to type up a memo that's nuclear command and control. So that's clearly a benign use of it. And so the interesting question is what's in between? How do you decide? AI and the nuclear enterprise, much broader than just the launch decision. Okay. Bottom line up front. Many applications of AI to the nuclear enterprise are either benign or actually enhance human control over nuclear weapons. But there is a narrow set of applications of AI to the nuclear enterprise that are stupid, unwise, foolish, to be avoided at all costs. Okay, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about all of these things. Okay. The quickie on AI here. I claim that there's a brief history on the left. None of it's really important except the fact that we did neural networks in 1960, and we showed that they weren't very good then, but a new iteration of them works now, leading to machine learning as the current paradigm for AI. Basically, what is machine learning is the use of large amounts of data to enable computers to perform tasks without explicit programming by generalizing or learning from patterns in data. People do this too. How do you? I mean, the example that I sometimes talk about here is that farmers learn how to differentiate the sex of chickens, of chicks, little baby chicks. You can't tell the difference, but in fact, you can with a lot of training. The chicken sexers have no idea what it is that they're looking for, but they can differentiate them with a very high degree of accuracy. All the buzzwords that you've heard before, multi-layer neural networks, deep learning, big data, generative, predictive AI. Probably the most important thing here is to know that the AI that we've seen recently in the form of large language models and so on, that's been fast, the rapid progress in that. Much faster than speech recognition or autonomous cars or computer vision and so on. Progress in AI is not uniform. Many different applications of AI. These are the things I want you to remember about AI or machine learning, as I'm mostly going to talk about. I'm going to more or less use those terms interchangeably for this talk. Purists will complain about it, and we can argue about that later if you want. Machine learning is still a way of programming computers. Underlying the computational capabilities of all of these AI systems are the von Neumann processors that we have known since the 1940s. It's just another way of programming a computer. It's not a special computer in any way. You can't understand what's going on inside a machine learning system. In conventional programming, you do explicit coding of instructions, but as a machine learning system operates, numbers change, and everything, all the content, all the knowledge is inside those numbers and how they change. You can't, it's very hard to define the rules, to identify the rules that drive the machine. Machine learning is at its root statistics. And as you all know, correlation is not causation. Sometimes statistical explanations are useful, and you can imagine ML giving you those things. But if you need a mechanistic or a causal explanation, it's going to be hard to get it out of a machine learning system. Garbage in, garbage out still holds, right? Bad training data gives you bad outputs. And bias in data will be propagated. Okay. And ML doesn't enable you to violate the laws of physics. It can't create new facts where none existed before. You can get more insight. That's useful. It's important. But it's not new facts. And they can't, it's hard to imagine ML doing a better job on addressing the unknown unknowns problem than people. On the nuclear enterprise, I had a repeated slide in there. I didn't mean to have it. Here's what I'm going to talk about. The nuclear weapons stockpile program, delivery systems and platforms, nuclear command and control. All of those things constitute the nuclear enterprise, not just command and control. Nuclear weapons stockpile. Okay, so here we go. Preliminary sidebar here. We use computers all the time to improve effectiveness and efficiency of information processing. And computers used everywhere in the nuclear enterprise, everywhere. AI can be used everywhere that computers are used. Therefore, you can use AI everywhere in the nuclear enterprise. And the question is, when is it sensible, when is it not? There's no reason to expect that applying AI will provide improvement in every application, right? You go to the Google Play Store, and you'll find half a dozen applications for AI and palm reading. Some of them even have pretty high ratings. Okay. Just because you apply AI doesn't mean make it good. And there's a long history of applying software and computational capabilities to military systems where we have shown that it makes things worse, not better. AI will not be exempt from that. Here's some possible ways of using AI in the nuclear enterprise. I'm not speaking as an advocate. I'm not saying we should do any of these things, but this is something that you might plausibly consider. In the nuclear stockpile program, right? We know that we have to maintain nuclear weapons without nuclear testing. And so computational capabilities are a big part of that. What is it? What do we do? Where might it be useful in maintaining nuclear weapons? Well, you might want to use this stuff to discover new materials that could be useful in making nuclear weapons. You might want to help you in the design process to explore a very large space of design possibilities. Okay. You might be able to increase efficiency, higher bang for the buck, reduce cost. You might want to use it in manufacturing and certification, greater efficiency on the production line and so on. You might want to use this in surveillance to analyze data coming out of surveillance programs to watch how nuclear weapons age. All those sorts of things are at least possibilities. NNSA has discussed these in a recent report. In nuclear delivery systems, consider the missiles. Okay, you can imagine AI being used to counter ballistic missile defenses. A maneuverable reentry vehicle might want to use AI to defeat an interceptor, perhaps anticipated, perhaps in real time. Might want to think about it as an application in fusing or trajectory shaping to evade missiles and missile defenses and so on. Cruise missiles, controlling a cruise missile. Okay. There's obviously an autopilot, that's AI in a cruise missile. You can imagine doing AI for terminal guidance to see, to increase its accuracy. You can imagine it sensing the environment so that it can avoid defenses and the like. On gravity bombs and warheads, you can imagine it being useful for doing fusing. When should I explode? And understanding a little bit about the environment to make sure that it's gone through its expected trajectory before it explodes as a nuclear safety issue. Probably you wouldn't see it here in real time, in thinking about real-time evasion in an RV situation. That means you need to think about, you have to have a sensor to connect to it. And getting the sensor information into a warhead that's coming down is mighty hard. But people still think about it. On platforms, we know that the B-21 nuclear-capable platform is going to have a crewless option. By policy, by preference, we say we're not going to put nuclear weapons on an uncrewed platform. Okay. But there's no official policy about that. Okay. Piloting and autopilots are clearly applications of AI. Interceptor defeats, that is a surface-to-air missile coming in. What do you do about it? When do you disperse your countermeasures and so on? You might have drones that accompany you to either with weapons or with defensive measures on it. You want to coordinate all of them. Well, clearly an AI kind of a problem. You can imagine using these drones to counter any submarine warfare efforts. Okay? All sorts of ways of coordinating that, coordinating decoys and the like. All of these platforms have electronic warfare capabilities. AI is an important aspect of managing the electronic warfare environment, both defensively and offensively. You want to be able, it's AI that senses it's AI that will help you determine the sensors that are pinging on you to determine whether they're a threat, whether they're not a threat, what you can do to evade them, how to jam them. All sorts of things that you can do in an electronic environment that people now do, skilled operators do. You can imagine offloading some of that to AI-driven systems. Less likely, I mean, I don't think we're going to think about AI in using in a crewed in a crewless bomber. But you know, stranger things have happened. One of the reasons that you have bombers is that they are supposed to be able to go after targets that are uncertain or things that pop up. Why you go after them with a nuke, that's another question that gets into the doctrine and so on. These are areas of uncertainty. On nuclear command and control, right? I want to. Nuclear command and control here. Talking about there's the nuclear command. The way the DoD talks about it is there's nuclear command and control, and there's nuclear command and control and communications. Former is people, policies, and processes for these 5 functions: force management, situation monitoring, planning, decision-making, force direction. And NC3, with the word communications in it, is the technology infrastructure. So if I look at what's included in force management is how do you maintain continuous control over your own forces in peacetime? This is controlling blue forces, blue nuclear forces. Okay? There are many things that are required to do. You have to facilitate nuclear command and control communications. So you need to monitor the activity, monitor and test to make sure that the channels are open. And when damage occurs, you need to be able to reroute and so you have to be able to interoperate between different systems. So AI is another way of enabling you to translate data from one system to another. Predictive maintenance. Okay? You have to be able to make sure that your missiles are going to fly. So you have to replace parts every now and then. When do you replace them? AI can give you some hints about that. Training and simulation. You want to use AI to help in simulation training, help decision makers learn about how to make decisions under stress. AI can help in maintaining base security. Right? You want to be able to sense what whether there are anomalous patterns of behavior in the computer systems. Okay. Cybersecurity application, AI in access control. There are places with locks and keys and combination locks, but it's much more than that, right? It's access control mechanisms that scan your retina and you look at your gait and the shape of your hand and all that sort of stuff. Okay? Lots of AI potentially in that. Situation monitoring, what's going on in the rest of the world, including the tactical warning issue, right? How about what happens when the other guy launches missiles and you see 2 satellites register an image of a missile coming up? Is it seeing 1 or is it seeing 2 missiles? That's a sensor fusion issue. And AI helps you resolve those kinds of issues. Maybe it helps you differentiate between warheads and decoys. Intelligence analysis for strategic warning. This is you monitor the other guy's force posture and broadcasts and so on, and you integrate this information and you come up with judgments about whether it's more likely or less likely that they're about to do something bad. And you want to be ready for that. You might want to know what blue forces are doing around the world. It's very hard to know for a central authority like the president and the secretary of defense to know everything that's going on with blue forces around the world. There were some big issues during the Cuban Missile Crisis about this, where we didn't know what all blue forces were doing, and we very nearly got into trouble. Okay. Lots of different applications here for situation monitoring. In planning, planning is a huge aspect of nuclear command and control. And you have to optimize and develop. You have to develop and update and optimize plans. For example, you need to know where the bombers are going to go. You can't just fly the shortest distance. You have to avoid defenses. You have to match the flight of the tanker of the bomber with the tanker that's going to refuel it in the air. These are all massively complicated problems to solve when you're dealing with hundreds of airplanes in the air. AI can help with that kind of optimization. Adaptive planning, you can receive data in real time and update your plans assuming you have time to do that, which under this assumption you do, you might want to be able to update plans. You could use AI to help you comply with the laws of war in developing a plan. On decision making, this is where a lot of people, of course, have paid most attention. This is trying to figure out what you should do with the nuclear weapons you have. Are you going to use them or not? Now, I point out that using them is only, using them in the sense of sending them to a target to explode is only one way of using nuclear weapons, right? If I have a nuclear bomber and I redeploy it from place A to place B, or if I surface a nuclear an SSBN, a ballistic missile submarine, and I surface it in a certain location, I'm sending a message. Okay? I'm using those nuclear weapons. I'm not using them to blow something up, but I'm using those nuclear weapons. Not all of those things necessarily have presidential authorization. The one that goes boom, that does, but not, some of those things, other things don't. The point here is that there are a lot of types of decision making with nuclear command and control, and you can imagine certain ways of using AI even in that. Okay, you might, for example, use it to think about how might an adversary respond to you if you surface a boomer somewhere, if you surface a ballistic missile submarine, or if you shift the location of if you redeploy your bombers closer to the front or something like that. You might be able to help predict adversary reactions. Okay, you might be able to use this stuff to understand in real time broadcasts that are coming over from the other side, news broadcasts and the like, language translations. You might use your own predictive analytics, AI-based analytics, to assess your operation in real time, to see how ready you really are to do X or Y. And again, blue force awareness is a big deal. You can also imagine this in the most stressful launch kinds of situations. Are you going to launch your missiles under attack? Launch on warning. Okay. And will your AI help you know with higher confidence that you are under attack? Okay. That is an alleged use of this. I'm personally skeptical about that, but that is an alleged use. And as I say, there are people who can, who think that this is a good thing to do. I point out, right now there's a 10-minute window, maybe, for the president to decide whether to launch under attack. But of course, that can only be, the maximum that can be is 25 minutes, right? Why is it 25 minutes? Because that's the flight time. Okay. You're not going to get 45 minutes of warning time. Okay. So you have to ask, is 30 minutes better than 10 minutes? Of course, it's better. Is it significantly better? That's an interesting question. And force direction has to do with how you actually transmit a decision to the forces. Right. So this is implementation of any order. Now, it also includes, as per policy, it also includes nuclear surety. I personally don't quite understand why it's not there, why it's there and not in force management, but never mind that. It's in force direction here. And there are lots of applications for nuclear surety. Better access control mechanisms to prevent unauthorized people from getting into physically touching nuclear weapons, advanced surveillance of sensitive areas, capabilities to make sure that there's nobody bad hanging around there, personnel reliability program. We have an extensive program to make sure that the people who touch nuclear weapons in any way, nuclear weapons plans and so on, have, are psychologically stable and they're not subject to blackmail or going crazy and so on. That's supposed to be a continuous evaluation. AI may help you to do that. Now, we've been hinting at this throughout the talk about some less likely uses of AI in nuclear command and control. I think it's less likely where AI replaces human judgment as opposed to signaling where human judgment is needed, right? So it's obvious in the launch division that that's such a place. We shouldn't be doing it there. Where beyond that can you go? And I'll talk about that in a minute. It's probably not going to improve the speed of order execution, but that's pretty fast already. It's never going to be able to flag the test tape problem, right? You may remember that in 1979, we had the problem with a test tape that was fed into NORAD computers, very realistic, and it signaled an attack. Why did it signal an attack? Because it was meant to look realistic. AI is never going to figure that out, because AI, by definition, will only look at what the system is giving you. You needed outside information, external information, to figure out that it was a dummy. Okay? And it won't fix the fog of war problem. That is, it's true that sensors can provide more data, but that data may be wrong or falsified. And even if you get more data, your systems are going to get more and more complex. And the solutions become very, very intractable very fast with larger amounts of data. So the computational requirements for processing lots of information are very, very high. I'll talk a little bit about some broader considerations. One cut at assessment here is to think about it in terms that three categories that I'll talk about: transformational, useful, and nominally or marginally beneficial. Okay. The transformational side is when it makes a huge difference, something where it's really useful and it can make and there are places like that. So, for example, if you have to integrate large volumes of heterogeneous information and organize that into some coherent whole, it's probably very, very, very useful for that. Tempered optimism, but not a bad place to start. There's a lot of information that comes in through early warning sensors, and being able to filter out wheat from chaff that's a big deal. There are places where it's useful. For example, in the incremental improvement in the stockpile management program, you could get better yield to weight ratios. You could do better modeling of insensitive high explosives and so on to make your nuclear weapons safer and so on. But the fundamental space of nuclear weapons is reasonably well explored. Okay. Really new weapons are probably unlikely as a place for AI. That's a judgment call, but and we can talk about that. And then there's another area that I'm talking about it as being marginally beneficial. Maybe some tiny benefit, but probably not worth the trouble. Like reducing the time from getting the EAM, emergency action message to launch, to the actual launch. As I mentioned before, the time for tactical warning is constrained by physics, right? That's a half an hour. You probably don't need battle damage assessment by overhead imagery. Now, people who talk about that, let's take a picture of the place that the nuke just blew up. It's probably not all that useful. It's probably not going to produce a lot more confidence in assessments of adversary intent, because that's really hard to do. And I point out that AI can introduce additional sources of error. We don't know how to do a verification and validation of AI systems very well compared to traditional software systems, in part because we don't know what it means to succeed with an AI system. We don't know what it means to, quote, work. It's hard to write rigorous specifications for that. You can't tell about the reasoning and the logic of it. There's a probabilistic nature to machine learning outputs. especially in the large language model and the like. And then how you communicate uncertainty to decision makers is a really is an unknown. We don't know how to do that very well. So, for example, you might imagine that at NORAD, somebody is looking at a screen, and then there's the signals, like a large-scale attack or something like that, a missile from coming out. And what's the confidence? Well, that's a statistical judgment, right? The statistics say that this is, that it's unlikely that this thing that looks like a missile flare is actually a missile. How likely is that? Or it doesn't occur by chance. Well, that's a statistical question. It's a very different question to say, and therefore there is a missile attack underway. Those kinds of questions get conflated. This question about maintaining human control and nuclear command and control. People have talked about a commitment to maintaining humans in the loop. And what is the definition of in the loop? And that's a really critical question, right? How about if the president sits there and he just has a bunch of screens around him? No human beings, but just a bunch of screens. And each of those screens is driven by an AI. Would we now say that that person is, in a meaningful sense, in the loop? I think probably not. But if we replace all of the screens by videos of a real human advisor, then we'd probably say, well, that's not bad. At least the president is getting advice and input from human beings. Okay? So, you can see where this question goes, right? At what point do you decide that there's too much AI input to the president to give the president meaningful control? Okay. What is the intended scope of this? And I think nobody knows the answer to that. There's no good answers to those questions. Okay. I happen to like the phrase meaningful human control or appropriate levels of human judgment because it calls your attention to the word meaningful or appropriate. Right? It at least sets up that conversation. Whereas you say it's in the loop, what does that mean? Okay. And this is a slide that I really want to emphasize. Okay. There's AI affects the nuclear enterprise, even if AI isn't used in the nuclear enterprise. Let me give you an example. The risks of using AI in the nuclear enterprise are affected by doctrine and force structure, in addition to technology. For example, one of the things we worry about when we think about AI and launch and so on is a mistaken launch. It's launching when it shouldn't have. Imagine that in a launch on warning scenario, right? It interprets sensor information, it's an attack, and we want to launch on warning. Obviously, if you eliminated the ICBMs, you wouldn't have that problem, right? Now, I'm not advocating yes ICBMs or no ICBMs. I'm not advocating that at all. But I'm pointing out that the risk clearly of adopting AI for a launch decision clearly depends on how your force structure looks like. Okay? And that point is often overlooked. What you want your nuclear forces to do and how you structure them and how you procure for them is not separate from risk of using whatever kind of AI you might want to be thinking of. Also point out that AI use in adjacent domains affects nuclear risk. For example, AI in conventional war for ballistic missile defense or for anti-satellite usage might spill over into strategic conflict, might lead to rapid escalatory pressures in a variety of situations. Okay. No AI in the nuclear stuff, but AI in the conventional stuff, AI in ballistic missile defense, that could have effects on nuclear enterprise. Okay. It could speed up conventional conflict, for example. AI failures in civilian infrastructure could lead to failures compromise the readiness of nuclear bases. And I point out that there are trends right now in the integration of nuclear command and control more closely with conventional command and control and with commercial assets. And we're using, it's full speed ahead for for conventional assets and in the commercial world with AI. So unless you believe that you can separate nuclear command and control from all of that, and nobody thinks we can, obviously it's the point that AI over there in the commercial world, the conventional world, could have effects on the nuclear side of the house. I want to give some criteria for making judgments about using AI in the nuclear enterprise. Okay? When the stakes involved are relatively low, maybe it makes sense to do that. I would think so. You gain experience in low stakes environments where the mistakes don't matter very much. So for example, in predictive maintenance, the worst that can happen is that you replace parts prematurely. Okay, and you incur a little bit more expense. Okay, and it's not a bad way to do it. You might also ask, is the commercial world doing it too? Why do you care about that? Because if the commercial world is doing it too, then you can build off of their experience. Okay. You can get, and they have good metrics of success, but they have to do route optimization all the time. The military can learn from that. And then you can set up a good dialogue. When a human has adequate time to review the output of an AI, okay? AI for doing pre-planned target selection is probably a less risky thing than doing AI for real-time target selection. Pre-planned, you can check the output, doesn't make any sense. If you're doing it in real time, that's very hard to do. When it's possible in principle to judge an output on ground truth, okay? When you have to have data, that reliable data to be available, timely, accurate, comprehensive, and so on, you have to be able to recognize failure and success when you see it. A great example where you can't do that is an assessment of an adversary's intent. You don't know. Okay. A good example is, blue force awareness. You can tell, you're supposed to know where all your forces are and what they're doing. And there is, in fact, some ground truth available there. When you can separate AI functionality from the rest of the system, when I can turn off the AI and the system can still function. I used to have a thermostat that had a little, that was a setback thermostat where I had a motor underneath it and it clipped onto the little lever and it moved the little lever back and forth. That is the first setback thermostat I ever had. And if the AI, if the control didn't work, I could detach it and control it by hand. Now I have to buy a Nest thermostat, and if the whole thing crashes, I'll freeze to death. True story. And then when mitigation mechanisms are available in case of failure, that is, if the system fails, you want to be able to rectify that. Okay? So in a factory controlled by AI with robots, with robot arms and so on, what they do is they weld big metal blocks on the floor to keep the arm from going past a certain point. And it doesn't matter if the AI controller of that thing goes haywire, you can't move the controller past those blocks because it'll kill the arm. There's a mechanism there to mitigate the worst consequences of failure. And you have to have those here. It depends on the application. For example, if you want to have AI launch weapons automatically, which is a bad idea, just pointing that out, right? But it's clearly more dangerous if you don't have a way of turning off the missile after it's been launched than if you do have a way of turning it off after it's launched. We don't do that for a variety of reasons, but never mind that. The point is that having the mechanism to turn it off is a lot safer than not having the mechanism to turn it off. I'm not advocating this, right? You understand. Okay, and those factors are incommensurate. So what you want to do is just think about how many of those things are true. Okay, My point is that that checklist starts a discussion. It doesn't end it. This is my bottom line up front. Many applications help enhance human control. A few of them don't do those. Okay? If I do for nuclear command and control, this sort of these criteria against these functions of nuclear command and control, and I sort of look at what's involved in them. I'm cheating here because I'm really averaging over a bunch of functions that are within it. Okay, I sort of count up the yeses, and I see that force management has 6 yeses, and decision making sort of has 1 yes, and force direction has 2. It sort of gives me a sense of where I'm more likely to be using nuclear AI in a nuclear command and control function. Probably, definitely not, maybe, probably in planning, for force direction, probably not. Situation monitoring, we can argue about it. Okay. That's sort of my assessment. Your mileage may vary. Okay. In the benign, catastrophic, unsure, I mean, it's clear that, I think that force management, mostly AI will work. Okay, there's nothing catastrophic in there. That's just another way of cutting it. On international agreements, I don't think there's any way to come to an agreement on this. We can share concerns. We can educate each other on AI versus AGI, artificial general intelligence. We've talked to the Russians a bunch. Pretty clear that they seem to think that when we say AI, they mean artificial general intelligence. There are a variety of things that we can do to minimize, not minimize risk, but at least share understandings. And maybe we can increase timelines for decision making, which is, of course, one of the pressures on AI. If we can reduce the pressures on timelines, maybe there's less need to use AI. For example, if we want to do a ban on ASAT or a ban on depressed trajectory missiles, maybe that will reduce the pressures to use AI. Okay. This is the cynic's view of AI. Okay, and I want you to keep this in mind. Okay. AI is what you call something that doesn't quite work. Okay. It works some of the time, maybe all of the time, maybe most of the time, but not all of the time. You don't understand it very well when it does work. You can't predict when it won't work. When it doesn't work, you often don't know it's not working. And when it's not working, you don't understand why it didn't work and don't know how to make it work better. Sometimes these are okay. It's okay to be all of those things. In fact, often. And so all proceed. But if any of those things you object to in the nuclear enterprise, and you might at some point, for some certain applications, then proceed with caution. Anyway, that's the end of the talk, and I'm open to questions and discussion.
All right. As per tradition in our Tuesday research seminars, we go to our CSAC fellows for the first couple questions. Just go ahead and raise your hands, and I'll keep a list. I see. Let's do 3: Hannah, Anna, and Max.
You have to wait for the mic, or do you just go? I just go? Oh, okay. Okay. Thanks for the talk, Herb. I'm Hannah, a postdoctoral fellow here at CSAC. I had 1.5 questions that are somehow connected. On your slides and in your talk, you often said that some users are likely or less likely, and I'm just wondering how you know, how did you make this assessment, or on what basis, do you assess what is likely or not likely? And then second, and I'm sorry to be this person, but this is more of a comment than a question, is I wonder if both the likeliness as well as the points that you made about the human in the loop and basically risk, a way to parse this a little bit better, and it's actually something that I work on with Anna, is to make a distinction between the areas in which AI would be integrated. So, for example, would it be helpful for your analysis to kind of decide between, is this a data processing application, is it a decision support application, or is it a decision making application? Because I think the third one is the one that you usually group into like the less likely or like more dangerous or higher risk or like higher stakes kind of like applications, whereas mostly the data processing stuff, like the word example, that sort of thing, things that are closer to automation rather than autonomy are usually like lower stakes. And I don't think like fewer people would have an issue with like, I don't know, using GPT to output PowerPoint slides in the DoD, for example, rather than, you know, have some sort of like AI as a dead hand kind of mechanism.
Were you okay? So on the second, there are decisions to be made everywhere. So, for example, if you're flying an airplane, maybe it makes a lot of sense to give an airplane carrying nuclear weapons. Maybe it makes a lot of sense to give control of the airplane to an AI to evade interceptors. I mean that's actual decision making, but I don't have a problem with that. So I think the distinction between data processing and decision making, I think is not entirely, is context dependent. And that your first question was again?
Just how you make the assessment,
Likely,
which users are
right.
likely.
I said yes, I use the word likely and unlikely, and that was based on an assumption of mine, where likely is if you were to follow my criteria, I think you would come up, you know, which I think are, you know, sort of a common sense approach to it. I think that most people who are in a decision making role would make those conclusions. That's my guess.
Great, let's go to Anna.
Yeah, actually, I had kind of similar questions, but also other ones. And I think one kind of follows what Hannah was asking. If you could tell us a little bit more about where AI beyond autocorrect and these kind of like more like automation tasks is already being used versus what is potential, because I wasn't sure, like, because you talked about some things where I can see it already like being tested at least, and other areas where it's like very potential. I was also wondering, and we talked about this before, where is the human in all this? Like, who makes these decisions? How do they go about it? And how do they get evaluated? Like, where is the space for policymakers to actually decide on where to integrate AI and how to go about it? And who's kind of at the decision-making table there? And lastly, about the question of meaningful human control or human judgment, I was also wondering, what does this actually mean? Because it is highly contested in other areas as well. So who gets to decide on a definition? And how would it be implemented in the nuclear sphere? Because, I mean, I work on autonomous weapons and AI more broadly, and it is highly contested on what human control is and how we should make sure that the human stays in control.
Your question 2 and question 3 are more or less the same, I think. And you know, who makes decisions to integrate AI? And you got to talk to the answer is the people who decide on the specs and on the contracts for, you know, for buying weapon systems. And you have to hold their feet to the fire and make them accountable. I recognize that that the terms are highly contested. I don't have any magic solution to resolving the contestation. But I do know that if I use the words meaningful and appropriate, people immediately are drawn to them. And they argue about that. And the point is, I want the argument to take place. And I don't think there's any meaningful resolution to it, no pun intended. I don't think there's any significant resolution to it in the absence of that argument. I don't know that the argument will actually create consensus on it, will result in consensus, but you have to have that argument. And it has to be an argument. When you say it's contested, I have seen it contested too, mostly in the scholarly literature. Not in the, you know, I don't know how this goes in, you know, in the Joint Chiefs of Staff tank. when people actually argue about this, I don't know how that actually goes. I want to have mechanisms there to force people in the tank to argue about it. And using words that are loaded, like meaningful and appropriate, is a way to do that. You had I think you had your first question there.
Oh yeah, so if you can say a little bit more about where AI is already being used. Or
An example is that it's already being, certain AI techniques are used in early warning. So, I mean, sensor fusion, the problem that I described about two satellites looking at, and looking down on the Earth and seeing a launch and resolving that as to one launch or two launch, that's, sensor fusion is an AI kind of problem. And they do, so that's an example.
All right, before we go to Max, raise your hands again, especially in this side of the room where I might not have seen you. I know there's a couple in the back, but Scott? Okay.
Max, you were calling him, Max was next to you.
Max is next, though.
Hi, I'm Max. I'm a postdoc here at CSAC through SARI, Center for AI Safety in the CS department. Thank you, Herb, for sharing your expertise and thoughts. I really appreciate that. I think I have two questions. The first one is like, if I look at your last slide to give you my cynic's view of that one, I think if you replace the word AI on that slide with human, I think it would perfectly hold as well. I wanted to ask you if you could potentially tighten some of these points to make a better differentiation between the two. And the second question might even have the same answer, but it comes back to your meaningful human oversight slide. And I wanted to kind of probe you. Can you outline one or two points where you say, hey, AI currently can't do that, but as soon as it's able to fulfill these criteria, then I'm good with it, or at least to delegate more autonomy in decision making? Thank you.
On the point that all of these things are true about people, which I freely concede. Okay. The point is that we have mechanisms today which address them. So for example, when people, as an example, when there's an accident that happens, so some airplane crash, you have people who go off and do and collect data, yes, and they look at the computer programs, but they go through interviews with the people. People will say different things, and there's a whole long process of in accident investigation, of reconciling conflicting testimony and so on, and they come out with a judgment. Now, we have mechanisms available to do that. We can interrogate the system in a variety of different ways. We don't know how to do that with AI. And to me, that's a big deal. If you can propose a comparable methods for investigating AI failures, I mean, I think that's actually a real research project. Okay, I don't think it's very hard, but that's something that we should talk about some more. But finding out ways of meaningfully interrogating AI in the same way that you interrogate the system when the system fails, like with the air traffic or whatever, that would be a big deal. Okay, that was your first question, and then your second question was.
I think the second question was coming back to the meaningful oversight slide. Right. Can you define one or two points that AI can't do now, that if it were to be able to tick these criteria boxes, that would mitigate a lot of your concerns? Meaningful evaluations also kind of goes in that box, but maybe there was a second point.
I can't answer that now. I have to think about that. No good answer there. Let's talk about that, and we can come up with an addendum to this.
All right. Let's go. I think Bogdan, you had a question, and then maybe the person sitting next to you, and then Scott.
Thank you very much. I'm Bogdan. I'm a pre-doctoral fellow here at CSAC. There's research that's being formulated now concerning the tampering with the field of civilian nuclear capabilities by AI. I know that it's not entering into the US nuclear enterprise as a traditional definition, but given the fact that that could entail like some sort of AI tampering, could entail, for example, some limited effects that could enter into the nuclear field, where would you put this into this categorization of yours? Where would you put this possibility of like transforming some sort of AI tampering with civilian nuclear capabilities into some sort of a nuclear incident?
So I think your question.
I was going to
Oh,
have
I'm
a
sorry.
two-finger from Philip Reiner online, which is
Okay.
asking a bit of a broader version of Bogdan's question, which is, he'd like to hear more about the vulnerabilities you foresee that would be introduced from the integration of novel AI tools in all of the 5 NC2 core function areas, namely cyber vulnerabilities, AI security and safety flaws, risks from agentic and multi-agent tools, loss of control risk. Can you speak to how that might factor into your thinking, which I think is adjacent to this issue of threats to civilian civilian nuclear infrastructure, for example, from cyber?
Okay, so I think that the two questions basically ask if you well, I think Phil is asking if you deploy AI, what are the risks of using AI in a hostile manner against NC3? I mean, that
or against civilian
nuclear
infrastructure.
And you know, that is not the focus of this talk. I mean, it's an important, the question that both you and Phil are raising are important issues and deserve discussion. I can answer that, but it'll be it's an off the cuff answer. It's not an answer that I want anybody to take seriously. Which is that the using AI in this kind of an environment and turning it into a threat. So there's the threat space there is large because we don't know, and that's in fact one of the problems here. We don't know how to constrain the threat space in any meaningful way, and without those constraints, anything becomes possible. And I can just talk off the top of my hat about any threat, and somebody will take it seriously. Maybe they shouldn't take it seriously. So I think the answer is we don't know.
All right. I think we had Scott, and then we have you and Chris. So let's go to Scott first.
So Herbert, I very much enjoyed this, and I wanted to agree with one thing and then push you on another. The one I agree with is that AI could be extremely important, albeit not imperfect, in doing proportionality analysis to think about the laws of armed conflict. And it would help you determine how the time of day, how the nature of evacuation or civil defense, how even the weather would influence the collateral damage of any attack and make you adjust a weapon or decide not to do something. It wouldn't be perfect. Think about the use of AI during the Gaza war. And that would be a warning, but also a sign of its utility, or it's certainly would be a proof of concept that it has been used. The question really, well, so how should you think about the following? In the same vein, I would think that AI could enable you, and I would very much support this, to say we don't need to hit empty silos, because we could figure out what silos an adversary would have, and you could either use no weapon or a conventional weapon, or not have to target an empty silo. Conversely, AI could probably help you hit mobile land-based missiles. How do we think about the trade-offs there? Is that just a matter of your philosophy of deterrence, or are those issues separable somehow, or the technologies could be separable? I don't know.
I think that the point that you're raising fits squarely with my argument that the use of AI can't be considered in the absence of understanding doctrine. Right, and that if you have a counterforce doctrine, for all that it's worth, then you are incentivized to go after mobile missiles, for example. And then if you want to do that, then AI will create certain risks, of that. But I would argue that they are not different in kind than the idea of having a counterforce strategy. Right? And you know all of the arguments that not. AI is just makes that worse in my view. On the empty silos part, I mean, there's a very interesting question there. Is you don't know which silos are going to be empty, and so and it takes a certain amount of time to reprogram missiles to hit them and so on. It's very hard to reprogram missiles that are out in the field. We can do it, but it depends on what assets you have left. I mean, it's a very complicated problem, even apart from the planning issues that getting the data in time and all that sort of stuff. So look, we talked about that again.
All right. Just a quick reminder: if you're on this side of the room, it's
Second question is, what I don't hear you saying is that this is using AI to make launch decisions. For example, in the dead hand system, it never happened. For example, as decision timeframes compress even more in the future, U.S. may feel like we're driven to that, or our adversaries, Russia, China, North Korea, could obviously do this without consulting us. So what I don't hear you saying is that this will never happen.
On the idea of dead hand, and I am aware of the War on the Rocks article there. There is another proposal out there which is not nearly so provocative. It is Sandy Winnenfeld's decide on attack. What Winnenfeld, who's a former vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, proposes is that you, instead of ordering a launch on warning, which means immediate launch on warning, what you do is you issue a delayed launch on warning. Execute this launch in 10 hours. I'm making that number up, okay, in 10 hours. So you have time to figure out what's going on. And in that scenario, what you've done is you've said to the forces in the field, do not execute now, execute in 10 hours. Okay? With the idea that you can also, if it turns out to be a false attack, a false warning of attack, okay, you now send another message out that said, stop, recall, do not launch. Okay? And since your command and control structure is still intact at that point, by definition, because there hasn't been an attack, you can send it out. Okay? Now, I hope people will recognize this as, you can debate the sensibility of it, but it's better than a launch on warning, right? So dead hand has a flavor like that. Even the proposal in War on the Rocks and the Russian perimeter system all call for somebody to turn the system on. And the interesting question is, when do you turn it on? Now, I don't want somebody to turn it on just when tensions are high. I mean, but you can get into that kind of argument. I mean, what I'm talking about when nobody sensible is talking about putting AI in charge. What I mean by that is the times when there's like where you have to worry about a launch under attack, a launch on warning scenario. the delayed retaliation and so on. I mean, that also gets into question, it's not unlike pre-delegation, which is also a possibility. So, I wasn't meaning to address those kinds of scenarios.
I think we have Chris, and then we have Sig, and then I'm going to try to squeeze in a question from Cynthia Roberts. Chris. Jim?
Oh.
Oh, Mike.
Mike.
That's okay. You're fine.
Back in the day.
Mike Matt, National Defense Fellow and a B-52 EWO, Electronic Warfare Officer. So fascinating talk. Strikes true for me in a lot of ways. Question I have is, or a comment then a question. Comment is, a lot of the weapons that we have, they're deliberately kept off of networks, right? So there's no tampering. It's a whole closed loop system. Every tool that has to be utilized on nuclear weapon prints, it has to be on a nuke certification list and it has to be verified. With the AI requiring, and correct me if I'm wrong, requiring inputs from outside sources on a regular to learn and continue to grow, I don't know how you rectify taking something that has outside influence and putting it into a closed system and then not knowing what the results of that might possibly be. And then the other part too is the weapons in the B-52 and the silos that we have for ICBMs. All the equipment is incredibly old and out there. I don't think that, at least at this time, you could include those in those systems without some major overall. I don't know about the B-21. I can't speak to the submarines. I don't know how advanced they are, but I can speak to the B-52 and ICBMs. I'm talking like big square buttons from the 50s that you're still mashing. So would AI, I don't know how you would include AI in a closed system, and would it be able to learn and make decisions if it was on a closed system because it couldn't be tampered with just the amount of security for the nuke surety that goes over that?
Well, I mean, pilots have been known to take their handheld device, which will contain AI, and put it on their lap. And I mean, that's using AI. That's a pilot using
That's not directly touching the weapon.
No, it's not touching it, but it's touching the platform.
I'm touching the pilot.
Yeah,
but it's not plugged into anything.
No, that's true. That's true. It's not. But the point is that it's an AI influence. So I mean, so I think that the answer is that even the old platforms are subject to this, and they're certainly subject to this through command influence, right? I mean, human beings direct their operation and so on, and human beings get affected by the outputs of AI. So I mean, the fact that there's no direct connection there, I mean, that's not reassuring to me.
I have Sig next on the list. Sig, can you go ahead and ask your question? You should be able to speak now. If you turn on your microphone.
Okay, can you hear me? Let's see. Yeah.
Here we go. We can hear you now.
Okay, you can hear me? Good. Herb, thanks. Very nice job. Very systematic and thorough as you looked through parts that you decided to cover. Let me first sort of suggest, along the line of a previous question, it would also be really helpful for you to take a similar look at the issue of how AI could impact sort of the proliferation and nuclear terrorism arena. I think that really needs to be thought through, very thoroughly as well. Particularly, for example, I've been worried for some time about what I would call what one could do with low-grade nuclear materials for bombs, both for terrorists as well as for countries. And again, it would be interesting to see whether AI could make things better for us or make it better for the others. But anyway, the question that I have is you showed how AI can be used constructively for stockpile stewardship, for example, all the things that it could do. Have you also thought about what could result from the widespread use of AI to the detriment of stockpile stewardship?
And then once you tell me, I'll tell you what I've been concerned about. Let me turn to you first.
I have the thought has crossed my mind, but I haven't done any kind of systematic analysis of it. So I'm sorry that you know, any answer that I give you would be, you know, very partial and very fragmentary. I do worry about where I see AI working best is in increasing the level of expertise of novices up to a higher grade of expert. Now, I don't know that they become real experts, but it certainly is AI is certainly a boon, a plus for people who are relatively inexperienced. Now, of course, in the nuclear business, as you know better than I, the primary issues have to do with availability of actual materials to work with rather than knowledge. And so you know, and to the extent that AI can help bad guys develop better ways of getting fissile material, that's a good thing for them and a bad thing for us. Conversely, maybe we can use AI as to shut off paths to do that. I mean, which says that we should be running AI-enabled red teams to figure out how to get all of the to get materials and to shut those pathways down. Beyond that, I don't think I have anything serious to say about in answer to your question, which is a very, very important question.
So Herb, let me suggest, if I may, Harold, if I still have a minute, let me suggest that one of the things would be interesting for you to take a look at. What I'm really concerned about is actually sort of a bureaucratic response to AI from the system within the DOE and NSA Department of Defense, and that's the following. I happen to believe that stockpile stewardship is really based to a large extent on the free exchange of information among those people who work that system, like at a Los Alamos National Laboratory. And therefore, I've always been greatly in favor of not overclassifying. And what concerns me right now, as I look at the potential implications of AI, is that the government bureaucrats will turn around and say, you know, these AI guys, I mean, they can find everything, do everything. And so we can no longer use this sort of free flow of information. For instance, I've published a lot on plutonium science. I could just see some bureaucrats saying, oh my God, you know, AI can go and put all those pieces together. And so from now on, everything that's written about plutonium from within the laboratories is classified. Then you can take that to all of the rest. And so you'll wind up living in a totally different, highly classified world, when in the past, in stockpile stewardship, sort of depends on a much more open system. So, you know, with all of your expertise and the things you've done in the National Academy, it'd really be interesting for you to take a look at that. So that's what I wanted to pose as my concern.
Thanks, Sig. Let's have another conversation about that. Yes, let's chat about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, I think we've probably reached the end of our time. I know we had more questions in the room. I think Herb, you're going to be here.
I'll be here for a while. Yeah, I can stay around. We can talk some more.
And talk to Herb. And sorry for the folks online that we didn't get to your questions, but
send me your questions and I'll try to answer them.
And we will pass those on to Herb. So please join me in thanking Herb Lynn for his talk today.